International Development Banks. Their purpose is to invest in developing countries. They are providing loans meant to boost economies and improve infrastructure. This should eliminate or reduce poverty. However, this is precisely where they often fail. A project in the Philippines, financed by the Asian Development Bank.
It's a coal-fired thermal power plant. They were about to use low-grade coal. This is a reserve, a sanctuary area also, because it's an island and they have a lot of corals and all those stuff. With the building of this coal-fired thermal power plant, a lot of these resources will be destroyed. Unfortunately, it went through. The project was approved. It was delayed, actually, but then in the end, it pushed through.
Hardly any other country in the world is more threatened by climate change than the Philippines. Yet the government still continues to rely on dirty coal, and development banks are supporting it.
Very often, the bank, or at least the engineers who will start the project, go in there, start measuring and all those things. And people are asking, what is happening? These multilateral banks, basically they have a business, and that is to dispose of loans. They just need to release the money, that they don't really see the demand side of it, which is the development side.
In principle, all loans provided by development banks are linked to environmental and social standards.
They in many cases have already very good standards on the books. The problem is that they're not implementing them.
It is disturbing that the very banks created for the task of combating poverty often reinforce poverty.
If they would function properly, they could play a very positive role in guiding investments in the right direction. And the right direction is not modernizing special small areas or having big supermarkets or just for an elite group, but what is for the advantage of the whole society, and especially which investments also help poverty eradication.
This should be of interest to all, because the development banks work primarily with the tax money from their member states. For example, Germany, Italy, and USA. The German organization Urgewald has been campaigning for environmental protection and human rights in development projects for more than 25 years. Burgled monitors many of these projects to ensure that they meet environmental and social standards. When projects do not meet the standards, the NGO puts pressure on the donors. The monitoring requires intensive research in order to provide the banks with well-documented facts and evidence.
Burgled is following a very particular strategy which we think is very effective, which is follow the money. We are trying to find out how large international financial institutions are actually allocating their funds, and to try to understand what the environmental, social and human rights impacts of these financing decisions are. And we think that if we can influence how these institutions are actually using their funds, then we have a much broader impact.
In early 2017, Urgewald organizes a major conference in Berlin, bringing together activists from many countries, the media, politicians, and representatives of multilateral banks. One aim is to strengthen the ties with international NGOs. This is crucial, now more than ever. A new multilateral bank has entered the international stage. It claims to be lean, green, and clean, but can it live up to its promises?
AIIB is the new bank, which is Chinese-led, and it's called the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank.
One cannot but not be concerned about, the human rights situation in China casting, a shadow over this bank.
After 1 year, we can see that the policy of the AIB does not match other development banks. In fact, it's the weakest of all the development banks.
How can that be? Numerous governments around the world, claiming to defend strong environmental and human rights standards, are now shareholders of the AIIB, including Germany, France, and the UK.
AIIB is still in its early stage for development. We are trying to develop our policies, frameworks, and business operations. And during this process, we certainly would like to have the engagement with CSOs like other MDB do.
However, even before important standards were defined, the AIIB had already invested in questionable projects. These include a mega gas pipeline known as the Southern Gas Corridor. If realized, it will transport gas from Azerbaijan to Europe. Gas is a fossil fuel that damages the climate. In Azerbaijan, where the gas is extracted, critics are being brutally suppressed.
I was arrested in August of 2014 and I got 6 years and 6 months by decision of the court. I was released last March after spending 1 year and 8 months behind bars. They closed the NGOs, they opened a criminal case against local and international NGOs. They amended 20 times the legislation on civil society. No freedom of assembly, no freedom of association, no freedom of expression. Unfortunately, this is our realities for today.
Suppressed human rights, environmental degradation, again and again, these are the results of projects financed by large multilateral banks. How can NGOs influence the banks to prevent this from happening? How do they make their voices heard by decision makers in politics and by the board members of the financial giants? Protest alone is not enough. Over the years, the critics have developed sophisticated strategies.
One very clear language they follow is really financial, meaning if you show them the risks and that they don't get any money out of this project, then they listen.
Well, they're always concerned about their reputational risk. They're probably less concerned about what Urgewald says, but they're concerned about, how Urgewald's positions are represented in the press.
I think NGO advocacy is critical across the board. I think it was a prominent American jurist who coined the phrase, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," and I think the NGO community does play a critical role in bridging people's needs in relation to projects to decision makers.
The NGOs have the greatest influence, not necessarily with the banks directly, but with the politicians who control them.
In der Politik sind wir überhaupt nicht in der Lage, uns selbst die Informationen zu beschaffen. Und da ist es natürlich zentral, dass es NGOs gibt, die uns mit Informationen versorgen.
Also die sind sehr wichtig, weil es am Ende natürlich auch um die Akzeptanz dieser Projekte geht. Und langfristig können solche Projekte nur dann erfolgreich sein, wenn auch die Menschen, die von den Projekten hoffentlich ja positiv betroffen sind, was ja die eigentliche Intention ist, dass die das eben auch so sehen.
Die kommen in regelmäßigen Abständen zu mir ins Büro, setzen sich hin und erzählen mir alles, was sich wieder ereignet hat und wo sie Probleme sehen. Und wir sind dann diejenigen, die im politischen Prozess versuchen, das zu thematisieren.
The role of the NGOs is crucial. The NGO help to articulate processes, pressures, interest, which elected officials are meant to be. But in developing countries, elected officials often don't function because democracies don't function so well yet. And NGOs help to transport the voices of these people into the international arena.
A great deal of responsibility, because NGOs do their work not out of self-interest, but for those who are negatively affected in developing countries. In order to make a difference, the organizations must act highly professional when they confront decision makers.
Investigation work is a critical area that is an area of need that NGOs fill to varying degrees. I think tracing the financial trail, the money trail about who is financing projects is another important area of need. that some NGOs are now doing more of, and building the accountability edifice around development is a critical area where NGOs have been and need to be, I think, very active going forward as well, and proposing solutions.
What's going on with the development banks? The idea behind their establishment was to make the world a better place by financing development projects to benefit the poor while protecting the environment. They must not forget what they promised. The banks could do better if they would just adhere to what they are promising. Until this is done, the NGOs won't stop their fight.
Very often, I think what we have been able to accomplish is delay the project to the extent that somehow they realize it's not possible. And in the end, some projects remain closed afterwards.
There is downward pressure on environmental and social standards. And, this is something that we need to fight against.